Hello everyone, my name is Araxi Nassif and today I will be presenting the feedback loops in the non-gravid female system, and we will get into positive feedback, negative feedback, what feedbacks are in the reproductive system, and so on. So now I just want to start with defining what these things are. So what is a feedback loop? What is non-gravid? So feedback loop is defined as the information gained about a reaction to a product which will allow the modification of the product. The feedback loops are therefore the process where there a change to the system results in an alarm which will trigger a certain result. So going from there is that this feedback loop will result in either an increase in the change to the system or reduce it to bring it back to normal. They are important in that they allow organisms to maintain homeostasis. So what does non-gravid mean? It's very simple, although it sounds a little complicated. It just means the absence of pregnancy. And gravid means the opposite. Now moving on to positive and negative feedback. What is a positive feedback? What is a negative feedback? What do they initiate? What do they do? What is their function? Why do we need them? So a positive feedback is defined a loop occurs in nature when the product of a reaction leads to an increase in that reaction. If we look at a system in homeostasis, a positive feedback moves the system further away from the target of equilibrium. So a negative feedback now, the loop occurs in biology when the product of a reaction leads to a decrease in that reaction. In this way, a negative feedback loop brings the system closer to a target of stability or homeostasis. So they're opposites. Positive feedback brings away from homeostasis, negative feedback bringing you closer to homeostasis. Adding on to positive feedback, examples would be contractions in childbirth or ripening of fruit. Now, examples of a negative feedback would be regulation of blood glucose and osmoregulation. So anything that you would regulate, thermoregulation, stuff like that. So that is the very basics. Moving on, we have examples of positive feedback and negative feedback in the reproductive system, which we will go on and talk more about. So positive feedbacks are things like childbirth because of the oxytocin and milk secretion. Negative includes the menstrual cycle and vaginal acidity. Although there are many more positive and negative feedback examples, I stuck with 2 for each for now. So now explaining childbirth, it's of positive feedback because it results in a change in the body status rather than a return to homeostasis as defined before. The oxytocin causes stronger contractions of the smooth muscle in the uterus, pushing the baby further down the birth canal. And that is why it's a positive feedback, because it does not maintain homeostasis. Milk secretion, on the other hand, is also a positive feedback. It's the suckling action of an infant produces prolactin, which leads to milk production. So the more suckling leads to the more prolactin, which in turn leads to more lactation. This is considered positive feedback as the product, which is milk, produces more suckling and more hormone. Now going on to the negative feedback, the menstrual cycle, it's in negative feedback, the rising levels of the hormones feedback to the hypothalamus and pituitary glands lead to the decrease of the production of the hormones. During most of the menstrual cycle, estrogen and proestrogen provides negative feedback to the hypothalamus and pituitary glands. So less hormones decreasing, trying to maintain homeostasis, that's why it's negative. Vaginal acidity, the lactic acid that maintaining this pH is made by lactobacilli, which is part of the normal vaginal flora. These bacteria grow faster and produce more acid at a higher pH, also trying to maintain. Now moving on, what is the menstrual cycle? What are parts of the menstrual cycle and why is this important? Again, we're going to cover all that now. So just a background information on what the menstrual cycle is. It provides important body chemicals that are called hormones to keep you healthy. A cycle is counted from the first day of the first period that you get to the very first day of the second period that you get. The average cycle is 18 is 20. Sorry, not 18. It's 28 days long. Cycle can range anywhere from 21 to 35 days in adults and 21 to 45 days in young teens. So we have a uterine cycle and an ovarian cycle. The uterine cycle consists of menstruation, the proliferative phase, and secretory phase. So I'm going to get into each one of those and describe what each one does and what's the function of each. So menstruation is the process of women discharging blood and other materials from the lining of the uterus at intervals about 1 lunar month. And now the proliferative phase, which comes next, it's when estrogen causes the lining of the uterus to grow or proliferate. As they mature, the ovarian follicles secrete, which increases the amount of estradiol and estrogen. And lastly, in the uterine cycle, we have the secretory phase, which occurs from day 14 to day 28. Proestrogen, stimulated by LH, is the dominant hormone during this phase to prepare the corpus luteum and endometrium for the possible fertilized ovum implantation. Now we have the ovarian, which consists of follicular phase, ovulation, and luteal phase. So follicular phase is a phase of estrus during which follicles in the ovary mature and end with ovulation. Ovulation is the release of the mature egg from the surface of the ovary, and this happens mid-cycle. And its ovulation is triggered by high levels of LH, which is the hormone. Lastly, the luteal phase, it begins with the formation of the corpus luteum and ends in pregnancy or lutealis. I think I said that wrong. Lutealis? Yeah. So, now we're looking into the positive feedback in the reproduction system, in the menstrual cycle, and what is all this. So basically, this is everything I've described, but specifically positive feedback, as you can see, it's the ovarian cycle, because it is consisting of the follicular, ovulation, and luteal phase, which are explained further here. So I don't want to repeat myself all over again, but there is more extra information here that are beneficial. So in the positive feedback loop, the follicular phase is a phase of estrous cycle, which we mentioned before, which follicles in the ovary mature. It ends with ovulation, and the main hormones control this stage are follicle-stimulating hormone and the gonadotropin-releasing hormone, and they are released by the prolactin secretion. Ovulation is the mature egg is released from the ovary, as we said. It's pushed down the fallopian tube and is made available to be fertilized. And approximately every month, an egg will mature within one of your ovaries. The luteal phase is the latter phase of the menstrual cycle, or the earlier phase of the estrous cycle, and it begins with the formation of the corpus luteum and ending in either pregnancy or lutealis. Now, moving on, there are 3 feedback loops in your menstrual cycle. So each loop presents something, and I believe they are coded with colors in a diagram, which I did not add here. But I believe the first loop is indicated as blue, as I remember, and the third loop is purple, I believe. I'm not sure what color the second loop was, but I'm going to go on and explain them. So the first loop is basically where the FSH and LH hormones are secreted to start the development of the follicle. Second loop occurs when the increased amount of estrogen that is experienced at the midpoint cycle creates a positive feedback to occur on the LH cells in the pituitary. And the third loop is the negative feedback loop, which is after the ovulation, the follicle cells are transformed in the corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum secretes estrogen and proestrogen. And now these are my references, Silverthorne, which is the textbook, and this article, which provided really interesting information on the menstrual cycle and the feedback loops. Now, since I do have like a minute left, I wanted to share also the portion of the self-assignment that I have created. So I just created a worksheet thing. It's feedback loops in the non-gravid female system. The first question was the label of the female reproductive system and the function of each part. So it gives you the basic, most basic knowledgeable information. So you move on and complete this assignment. So basically, I added a diagram that has none of the labeled parts of the female system, and then I also added a part of the diagram that has the labels. And basically what I said here is you label it, which was pretty easy. Just know your parts, and then also explain the functions of each so you understand. So now I'm not gonna go deeply into this because I will post it. So just the parts that are mentioned in the diagram above. What are the functions? The egg, the uterine cavity, endometrium, myometrium, cervix, uterus, ovaries, and vagina. So I'm just gonna say 2 over here. So the uterus functions is to accept a fertilized ovum, which becomes implanted into the endometrium and derives nourishment from the blood vessels, which develop exclusively for this purpose. The ovaries produce oocytes, which are also known as eggs, for fertilization as they produce the reproductive hormones estrogen and proestrogen. Sorry, I'm just going to fix some spelling here. Alright, so the next question I added was name some complications or reasons that a female may not get her menstrual cycle. So there are natural causes, but there are also non-natural causes. So natural causes are amenorrhea, which include pregnancy, breastfeeding, and menopause. Lifestyle factors may also include excessive stress and exercise. Having too little body fat or too much body fat may delay or stop menstruation completely. Hormonal imbalances also may cause amenorrhea. So I put 2 disorders. Menopause is not really a disorder, but I added it there too. Psychotic ovary syndrome, although I found interesting, it causes enlarged ovaries with small cysts on the outer edges, and the symptoms include infertility and scanty or infrequent menstruation. Now, menopause, it's a natural cause. It's a natural decline in reproductive hormones when a woman reaches her 40s or her 50s, and symptoms may include irregular menstruation, and eventually she won't have her menstruation anymore. The last thing I added here, which I thought was also a good refresher, I said indicate whether each of the following is a positive or negative feedback. Oops. Sorry. Ooh. Alright, so now I added just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 examples: childbirth, blood clotting, thermoregulation, ripening of food, blood sugar regulation, and the last one, I don't know if you see it, it's menstrual cycle. So childbirth is positive, as we stated before. Blood clotting is also a positive form. Thermoregulation, I feel like it's easy to remember negative feedback by you're regulating something. You want to return something to homeostasis, so that would be negative feedback. Ripening of food is positive. The blood sugar regulation, negative, has the word regulation, and the menstrual cycle, although it does not have the word regulation, it is negative. So that is it. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something today. Thank you.